It's the 87th Precinct podcast. This is the only podcast in the world dedicated to Ed McBain's 87th Precinct Mysteries, the genre-defining series of police procedural novels, which began in 1956 with Cop Hater, and ended in 2005 with the novel Fiddlers. There were 55 books in the series, and today's podcast is all about book number 26, Sadie When She Died. My name's Paul Abbott, and to review the book, I'm joined by two of the most notorious Christmas-time shoplifters in the city. Mr. Stephen, Hark the Herald Angels Gone, Royston, and Mr. Morgan, Away with a Manger, Brown. Good
Hello.
evening.
Good evening.
I did a lot of work there getting a Carol-based pun to tie this into the book there,
Nice.
You see.
Time well spent.
Yes, indeed. So, anyway, as usual, we appeal, dear listeners, to you for your support. Please share, rate and review the podcast on whatever app it is you use. It's really helpful to us to get more people to hear it. And if you like what we do enough to contribute financially, then please consider buying us a digital coffee at www.ko-fi.com/hark87podcast. And anything we get will go back into the costs of running the show. I've got a tiny little bit more housekeeping before we start, and that is that if you haven't listened to it yet, then I recently put out a podcast, a side pod, all about the Richard Marston book Rocket to Luna, which featured our first returning guest, which was my brother, Gary Abbott. It's one of his juvenile sci-fi stories from the early 50s. So please do go and have a listen to that if you haven't already. And if there's anything else, McBain, Hunter, Marston, Lombino, whatever, that you'd like us to cover as a spin-off at any time, let us know. And maybe if you bought us a digital coffee, buy us a drink first, and maybe we'll do something about it for you. But we'll turn our attention now to Sadie When She Died. But we'll try and get it into context. But not the broader context. That's moved into the bonus podcast.
Oh, it has.
So if you want to know all about 1972, you need to listen to the bonus episode. But we'll have a look at what Evan Hunter was up to in 1972 or thereabouts. Is that all right?
That sounds good.
Yeah, perfectly fine, I would say.
So he was a busy chap in 1972, as he normally was. He was busy most of the time. I'd been compiling a list of his writings for research, and boy, there was a lot of stuff. And by 1972, he's sort of calmed down a bit. Which, as a man who's got a very established career by that point, you can sort of understand. But probably in comparison to many people's writing careers, he still looks to be going 10 to the dozen. So I'll tell you a little bit about what came out. So obviously Sadie When She Died is the book that we're going to look at today. That's the 87th Precinct novel from this era.
Mm-hmm.
He published a book called Every Little Crook and Nanny.
Oh, yes.
That's a farce, I think, a sort of a mafia farce.
That popular genre.
Yeah. I think you can probably work backwards from the title to what actually happens in the book itself.
I imagine that's kind of how the book was written, really. Yeah.
Well, he does admit that he uses titles and sort of works from there. But Every Little Crook and Nanny was also abridged and released in a copy of Cosmo and in Star Weekly, that Canadian one that sometimes features 87th Precinct things.
Perhaps he was trying to cash in on the Godfather success.
Well, he may well have been. It was in the air, wasn't it? All that stuff.
Yeah.
He also released. I'm checking down my little list here. An early version of the next book we're going to look at was published in Argosy magazine. A story called Sympathy for the Devil, published in 17 magazine, which was a magazine for 17-year-olds.
Just 17-year-olds.
Just 17-year-olds. If you tried to look at it at the ages of 16 or 18...
There was a magazine called Just 17.
Yeah,
There was actually, yeah.
There was in the UK. This same thing, really, I think.
I don't think Just 17 particularly published much Evan Hunter material.
Not that I remember.
No.
It was for girls, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I think this is a sort of juvenile fiction thing again. Still occasionally wrote them. He wrote a thing called The Telegram Code under his pseudonym John Abbott, which was in Ellery Queen's Mystery magazine. And he also put out a collection called The Easter Man, a Play, and 6 stories,
The Easter Man.
The Easter Man was one of the plays that he did, also known as A Race of Hairy Men, that was put on in...
Come again?
A Race of Hairy Men. That was on in the UK and in America later, but this is some of his short stories and that play in a book.
Okay.
And also in Germany, in Playboy Germany, he published a story called Hatte so leicht bei ihr landen können, which is, I think, how it's pronounced.
Excellent.
Which translates as he could easily land with her. I don't really know what land means there, whether it's a double meaning in the way it's used or...
Almost certainly,
It is
surely.
Playboy.
Yeah.
So, he was quite busy still writing all these various little bits and pieces. And on telly and screen, Every Little Crook and Nanny, which had come out as a book in 1972, also came out as a film in 1972. And it starred Victor Mature and Lynn Redgrave.
Sir Richard Neasden.
And Lynn Neasden. There's a reference for people to look up. The Czechoslovakian Love of McBain adaptation starts in this year with a thing called Zabijak. I think that's pronounced. Which I think is based on Cop Hater. Is made for TV. Not Zabadak.
No, I was
I
going
was
to
gonna
say. Adapted from the Dave D. Dozy Beacon McIntitch hit of the same name.
They could all play members of the squad, couldn't they?
It was probably mooted at one point.
Dave D as Lieutenant Burns.
Who would Dozy be?
Titch as Hal Willis.
I presume most of our listening audience will be at least passingly aware of Dave D, Dozy, Beaky, Mick and Titch as a
Who
rock
isn't?
combo.
I assume everyone is.
Well.
And their hit Zabadak.
Yeah. But the film of Fuzz came out in 1972 as well, which I've covered on another podcast elsewhere. Plenty going on for Mr. Evan Hunter, Ed McBain, but we're going to concentrate on Sadie when she died, which was featured in Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine in an abridged version, but that was not until January 1973. So I hand straight over to you guys for initial thoughts on Sadie when she died, especially given that the last story we looked at was Hail, Hail, the Gang's All Here, which is a totally different type of book. So where are we with this?
I suppose my overall impression of the book is a slight, quite sombre tone, quite serious book, and quite...
Yeah, I'd agree with you.
darker than usual.
Yeah, definitely.
Certainly felt absent of the lighter touches that you get. Probably wouldn't score very highly in bingo terms, I wouldn't thought. Very low score.
Yeah, I think you could be like that.
Well, I've got a note about that. We talk about this mythical bingo card for the 87th Precinct, which has all these features that you could, in theory, there'd be one book that would tick all of the boxes.
Yeah.
And I think of a bingo card as being like a 5x5 grid, and I haven't got 25 things.
No, it's very low. Very, very low in that. If the previous book was a bit of a celebration, this seems to be a bit of a purposefully darker tone, I would say.
Yeah, compared to the last one, this is very, somber. Somber's a good word.
It's like kind of depressing all the way through, really, in terms of what's gone on and happening, and then ends incredibly depressingly as well, doesn't it?
Kind of foreshadows some of the sort of darker, later entries in the series. Some of the ones sort of around the early 90s, I guess.
Yeah, I
possibly,
think so.
Yeah.
I think he even seeds some of the things that come into the later books in this, or at least some of the sort of tonal things.
Yeah,
But
so-
back to that bingo card thing. Like I made a note of this here. It does have a lot of the stuff, but only as very sort of quick snippets.
Yeah.
So there's no extended descriptions of the cops, but there is like eyewitnesses see Carella in sort of racist terms.
Yeah.
That's
or-
it, yeah, I'll pay like brief lip service to those descriptions that we've already had in fuller terms previously, but you don't get the whole kind of spiel, do you?
Yeah, there's a very brief "City is a woman" passing reference.
Yeah, Monaghan and Monroe are in, but you don't get
fact, I
the
think
usual page and a half of them
Yeah.
wisecracking. They just mentioned, aren't they, almost?
I would feel guilty ticking the bingo card for some of these ones on this one, because it is literally, these are passing descriptions.
Yeah.
The only thing you definitely get for this is Maya does tell a joke in full in the squad room, which is definitely on the bingo card.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of reproduction printed things in there.
Yeah.
I suppose the only one that gets a real tick is that the weather is featured quite heavily in this, as it's a Christmas time story, this. Which is why I was talking about Christmas time at the start of the introduction. I wasn't just going mad. as we're sat here in one of the nicest days we've had for a little while, and it's been quite warm and sunny, so it's always strange to be reading a Christmas book that is so properly Christmassy in the sense of weather, not in terms of jollity and kindness. But yeah, I agree with you entirely about the bingo card. So,
and it's also, I thought as well, and we do like to mention this frequently, it was a bit Columbo-ish as well, I thought.
Again, on my list.
In that, well, you're led to believe that they know who has committed a certain crime, just like you do in Columbo, really, and it's will... they be able to prove it, or did the person indeed do what they think they did without giving it away?
Yeah, I'm totally up for the Columbo thing.
Yeah, there's less red herrings in terms of the usual investigation, which is in quite a lot of the other books. It's a little bit of a cat and mouse with one individual for the entire
less
book,
of the wider ranging investigation and the blind alleys and everything that you get. Yeah, I can see that.
But if you think of it in terms of Columbo, so we know that 2 87th Precinct stories were adapted for Columbo, whereas I was reading this and thinking, why wasn't this adapted? Because this is almost a Columbo story. The main villain is basically taunting the lead investigator by hanging around with him. And I know Columbo normally hangs around with other people, but there are certain stories of Columbo where they always keep meeting, and it's from the villain sort of thinks that sticking close to the investigator is going to get him off. What baffles me is this was never adapted for anything.
No.
I say that it was never adapted as a Columbo, obviously. There's been a couple of Japanese TV series, one in the 90s, 2000s, one in 1980, and I think there may have been an episode based on this in each of those 2 Japanese things, but it's very hard to tell because the Japanese translation tools in Google make everything very bizarre, and you get sort of lists of who plays who, and it's got just random words like Ocelot in the middle of it, and you're thinking, is this supposed to be enigmatic or is it just a mistranslation?
Or did they actually cast an Ocelot as that character?
Yeah. Sadie Collins is played by an Ocelot. But in terms of a bit of trivia, there is in the Evan Hunter archive evidence that he adapted it as a teleplay, but there's no evidence for what that was for.
Oh, right.
So in 1980, I think I've got a little list somewhere. Where are you? Yeah, October, November 1980, there we go. It just says he wrote a teleplay based on this, but just doesn't say what for.
Oh, perhaps it was Columbo.
Perhaps it was an early attempt to get one of his... which, I don't know.
Oh,
it just seems odd that it just never, out of all of the ones, because so many of them get made and remade out of the adaptations.
It's true.
Yeah.
How peculiar.
But in other ways, it's totally atypical and is exactly what an 87th Precinct novel is. It's an investigation of a crime with a bit of colour in the squad room thrown in along the way. Do you want to hear some reviews from the time?
I would love to.
See if they chime with your views or whether we want to shout at anyone with silly names. So a guy called Matthew Cody in an article called Doc Briefs in The Guardian, 26th of October 1972. This time a solo for the 87th Precinct's detective Steve Carella. It's not really. He does do stuff with other cops. Nympho housewife is murdered. A junkie confesses. The truth, more sad than sensational, reveals McBain as a transatlantic Simenon.
I think it says that on the back of mine.
Everyone went leaping for their copies of the book because it's a quote on the back of them. I think there actually is a direct reference to Maigret in this, because at one point he talks about the notion of chercher la femme being a reason for crime, and it's he says that's surely more to do with the sûreté of Stevo's holding up a massive volume of Georges Simenon Maigret novels. And so we've now got a black and white photo of Simenon looking at us with his pipe and his bow tie and his glasses. Hi, George.
Looks a bit cheeky, doesn't he?
He does. Then perhaps moderately surprised.
He does,
caught slightly off guard.
Yeah, he wasn't expecting that. Someone's caught him in his pipe shed by the looks of it. There's lots of pipes behind him.
Yeah, he has, hasn't he? Anyway, I just thought had that to hand, unplanned.
That was bonus Georges Simenon making an appearance there for you all. But yeah, he doesn't say anything directly about a Maigret story, but he does talk about the sûreté. And in terms of crime fiction, that's where Maigret's based, isn't he? He's a member of the sûreté, the French police. So that's where I think there's a a tie-in there, anyway.
Yeah, quite plausibly.
Now, do we all remember the wonderfully named Newgate calendar who took over the Criminals at Large review column in the New York Times?
Oh, yeah.
So, Anthony Boucher, long gone, and the...
Sad times.
What's this person called? Newgate Calendar?
Yeah, we talked about it last time, and probably another time before.
Forgotten.
Well, it's because they're not words you'd put together in your head as a name, really, is it? But he says, it is McBain's 25th novel. Well, yeah, novel, if you're going to be fussy about the empty hours. About his 87th Precinct cops. This one deals with a husband whose wife is found murdered. She isn't found murder. The murderer is found, but is he really the murderer? The cops think not. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Everything is solved in a rather anticlimactic manner. McBain is a professional enough writer, but this book will give the reader no more pause than the average TV crime show. Everything is slick and preordained. He's a misery guts.
He's
a calendar.
He's a rotter, that Unigate Dairies. I'm not having him at all.
I don't know that slick is necessarily I know it can be applied like a negative thing, but he is a slick writer, I think, in times, and I think that's to the credit of the books, though, isn't it?
Yeah. Not really a criticism, I don't think.
But,
Absolutely. No, I do not agree.
Yeah.
Strongly disapprove.
Let's write a letter to the New York Times, 10th of December 1972. One quick one from Maurice Richardson in Crime Ration in The Observer. One of the very best of the 87th Precinct saga. So I took out that little quote there, which I think is...
Marvellous.
I'm quite happy to agree with, really.
Yeah, it works for me.
So who wants to outline what goes on? Why is this called Sadie when she died?
I'll let Morgan have a stab.
Oh, God, don't make me do it.
Well, I've kind of given a little teaser of what's gone on.
So did Newgate Calendar.
Indeed. Yeah, well, he did. In a slightly derisive... Yeah. That's the exact word I was looking for. Yeah, it's interesting though, because at first we don't think there is a character called Sadie. Who's this Sadie?
No idea. You don't find out for a good long while, actually.
There's a Sarah Fletcher who's been murdered.
Yeah, we open right in the crime scene. Guts all over the place.
In a burglarised apartment.
Yep, absolutely.
The body in the bedroom and footprints in the kitchen and windows smashed and...
Knife still in the wound.
And a...
fingerprint on the knife.
And a husband who's just returned saying, I'm glad she's dead.
A lawyer who really enjoys making pronouncements that make him sound really guilty.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite strange, that, really. And then... Carella's just absolutely convinced that this guy's killed her somehow.
He's just got the instinct, hasn't he? He feels like this guy is basically telling him it without saying it.
Yeah, and yet they find the burglar through fairly conventional means, because he had to jump out of a second-storey window and hurt his leg, and there's a witness who lives in the block of flats who is able to then identify this person who had to go to the doctors and gave his real name.
He's not exactly a master criminal,
no,
is he?
he's kind of a total novice. And he's arrested, and
that's the end of chapter 2.
Admits to having...
Yes, that's it. Crime solved.
He admits to having stabbed this woman, and
feels genuinely pretty bad about it. Actually, seems like an all right guy, really, doesn't he? Yeah. He's okay. He's made some bad decisions, but
he's a junkie basically, and he was burglarising to make some money to get some drugs. Yeah, which is the usual bottom line of those stories.
Yeah, indeed.
But if you actually put chapters 1 and 2 out as a short story, you could actually play a clever little game there of making it seem like the opposite of what actually happens in the book would happen, where you would be thinking, oh, it's definitely the husband, and in the end it turned out to be...
Oh, it's just
a junkie.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, really.
Yeah.
But basically then the rest of it plays out as this cat and mouse, doesn't it? Between...
Yeah. Well, Burns, against his better judgment, allows them to...
Surveil.
Have surveillance on Mr. Fletcher.
But Mr. Fletcher almost kind of actively... Well, he does actively kind of invite Carella into...
Goes drinking with him on a pub crawl.
Yeah, a very pointedly chosen pub crawl.
Yeah.
and it's all a bit strange, really, because the way the Fletcher character develops is that, like, certainly initially, and for most of the book, he's this arrogant kind of taunting. You'll never prove it, and he's just being a bit strange, isn't he? And you get the feeling he's doing it all through his like sheer arrogance, really. Yeah. But then towards the end of the book, you start getting the feeling it's not really arrogance, really. It's kind of he's almost willing to be found, isn't he? He kind of almost starts going out of his way that he hopes that the truth will be discovered. That's the impression I got. Certainly at the very end, because he could have just so easily not done what he did, ultimately does, really.
Absolutely. There's also a bit of a sense of him kind of wanting to justify himself as well.
Yeah.
He's explaining why he's done what he's done without actually admitting it, but does everything but admit that he's actually done it. And,
so he kind of wants to. It's like he's almost punishing himself, but I don't know. Yeah, it's quite a complex character, I suppose. Yeah,
it's quite psychologically interesting. He's not just a sort of straight out of the box kind of psychopath or anything, is he?
Who would you have play him out of the Columbo villains?
Well, what's the guy with the? He played quite a few.
Robert Culp?
Yes, him. Yeah.
It could be Robert Culp.
Yeah, lawyer type. Yeah,
definitely. So you're not going to get William Shatner in for this role?
No, Donald Pleasance. No, I think Culp. Yeah,
Culp, one of the returning ones.
Yeah.
Or perhaps Patrick McGowan. You always get good value for money with the Patrick McGowan story.
It's not a what's his name, Cassidy one, is it?
No, it's not a Martin Landau one.
No.
If only it were.
Well, everything is in our heart.
Yeah, maybe Culp. Yeah, because Carella kind of gets on with him quite well as well, doesn't he?
Well, it's a strange thing because this guy's a lawyer, so they know people in common through the district attorney and courts, and so he finds Carella's home number through someone they know, one of the assistant DAs, Rolly Chabrier, or Chabrier, I presume it's going to be pronounced, who we haven't seen since Fuzz.
Oh, indeed, yeah.
He was the person that Maya called up to ask for advice about the book called Maya, which I still haven't read, even though I've actually got a copy of. I must read that. So that's an interesting thing. Yeah. But they have to carry on this investigation, even though Carella knows in his heart of hearts that Gerald Fletcher's committed this crime, presumably. They have to carry on with the investigation anyway, and they've got this diary from the murdered woman that has all this list of names and addresses in.
And a little code.
It's probably worth mentioning the reason why they think he did it, because there's no doubt that the burglar stabbed her.
Yeah.
It's more, had he stabbed her... Because it sounds like he just stabbed her once, didn't he? And then ran off, whereas it was actually...
She's disemboweled when she's found.
Very violently. So the reason why the husband's under suspicion of finishing her off kind of thing, was he take advantage of this terrible situation? Because by his own admission, he hated his wife.
We've got little things like there's one chapter 3, which is just a complete interview page for the DA interviewing the burglar who's caught, Ralph Corwin, before they send him off to a prison that's nicknamed Calcutta, which is, I was trying to work out what the real world equivalent of this would be, and the nearest I could figure out was that the Manhattan House of Detention in this period of time, before it was closed down and changed again in the mid-70s, was known as the Tombs.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, I think, well featured in other books and films and things like that, and it's quite well known. So I think that might be the equivalent of that, but I'm not sure anyway. But we've got to talk about everyone's favourite blonde man, Bert Kling, as well.
Yeah.
Because this isn't just a straightforward Carella book, by any means.
No, indeed.
Kling's in it quite a lot, actually, isn't he?
But he's in it, he sort of gets himself in a situation because... Kling's been going out with Cindy Forrest since the incidents in 10+1, where her father was killed. And as usual, what Kling does is when he comes across a witness or a family member, he asks them out.
Of course he does.
So, but they've been going together for a number of books now anyway, although she's only appeared a couple of times. But she splits up with him somewhere between the last time we've seen her and this book.
Very sad.
So he's in a weird mood. So along comes this eyewitness, Nora Simonov, at the start. And the first thing is like, he's on the phone to her like, will you come and do an ID parade and have lunch with me? It's like, yeah, thanks, that's helpful. You can see this going well. And but she seems to be succumbing to his charms despite having a boyfriend, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you're meant to think that it might be Fletcher.
Yes, I think so. I think that's one of the games.
Because she refuses to... There's some reason why she's not with this person, and you're not really that clued in. And I don't know whether it was just me being really thick, but you got the impression that you think, is it Fletcher?
She's the only red herring.
Yeah.
Because she won't reveal who. And Kling, being Kling, sort of tries to wheedle out of her who her boyfriend is, because she says he's a doctor, and he tries to trick her and says, "Oh, at this hospital, in this place," and she gets the details wrong.
So he knows she's lying.
Yeah. But he also then gets the snot kicked out of him by three men who tell him to leave her alone.
In no uncertain terms.
Yeah, so he ends up with broken ribs in hospital just before Christmas.
Lovely.
Very nice. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Bertram. But this is what I was talking about, the foreshadowing books to come. One of Kling's problems is he's suspicious of everyone, isn't he? His girlfriends in the future. I think most of his relationships are ruined by his behaviour and his suspicions. And you see it in this one, because although he has right to be suspicious because he's been beaten up, he's sort of a bit funny from the start. She doesn't give him all the information he wants. And he sneaks into not sneaks into her apartment, he sneaks around her apartment, steals letters. And you wonder how official this is going to be. I know he's been beaten up, and obviously they're entitled to investigate this crime, this assault on a police officer. But it's very much the Kling that's going to come, I think.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, it's fairly, perhaps, just a function of being a police officer, just naturally suspicious, really. Yeah. With the fact that she keeps going out with him, you would
he does
would have hoped it would be enough for him.
But at the same time, he thinks he's going to get back with Cindy Forrest during the course of the book. They exchange gifts and everything. And then she tickles off, never to be seen again.
No, I don't think she is she?
No, I don't think so. No. She's not on my little list of reappearing characters.
No. Oh, well.
Oh, poor Bert. McBain always got in trouble. I think I've mentioned this before. People were always writing to him or talking to him about, why won't you give Bert a break? Why don't you let him be happy for a bit? It's like, you don't do that. There's a couple of my favourite things that McBain does in this book as well, I think appear in grand form for the first time. One of them is the narrator's voice.
Oh, yeah.
Did you spot the Saturday night section?
Yeah, where's that?
With all the asterisks in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite...
He goes mad, basically. And the narrator just suddenly starts talking all about Saturday being, in really sarcastic terms about how amazing Saturday night is, and having all these capital letters with all the little asterisks in between to really blow up the notion of this, like flashing lights, good times. But
no, I've always loved those little rants that he goes off on. They're fantastic.
Yeah. This is perhaps Evan Hunter had a night planned to go out, and he was he couldn't make it, so yes, onto the typewriter, hammering the shift and 8 key, get those asterisks in there. It also involves a gag that ends up with a joke about Spiro Agnew.
Oh yes,
a name I know probably only through American comedies. I don't actually know anything about Spiro Agnew particularly.
Just Nixon's vice president.
He was,
Is that right?
And then he ended very ignominiously. I think the year after this was written, possibly.
Yeah,
he had to resign.
Yeah, he did over some scandal or other.
Yeah, I think he was taking kickbacks from developers and things like that to pass things through, or city ordinances or whatever it was, wherever he was based. Gosh, like Nixon's Nixon's era was troubled some way. Imagine that. But it can't have been a good looker, because Evan Hunter makes a joke, or Ed McBain makes a joke about turning into Spiro Agnew is a bad thing.
Something else I thought there was in this book, quite lots of blue language, isn't there?
There's a lot of blue language.
Very naughty swear words.
Indeed there is, and that should perhaps act as a little trigger warning for anyone who is offended, because we do have to discuss some of this, because some of the blue language is directed towards the notion of, as it turns out, Sadie Collins, which is the name that Sarah Fletcher is using when she's meeting all these people in her address book. So none of these people they go and interview recognise the name at all, but when they see the picture, they're like, oh yeah, that's Sadie Collins. I was hooked up with her for some real good times.
Yeah.
She was a wild one.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
She was also, and I apologise for using these terms, but they're in the book, she was described as a crazy bitch, and also, rather more dramatically, I think, as a... Do I say this with the American pronunciation, or do I say it with the way I'd say it?
You can't say with the American pronunciation, it would sound silly.
It does sound a bit silly.
Well, I'll say it both ways, and so that way I've really hammered it home. A stupid twat.
Yeah.
Or a stupid twat, as they would say in America.
Indeed.
And I don't really understand quite, because I don't know how that figures in the power ratings of swear words in America.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
You know, is it worse than the C word? Well, presumably not.
It's fairly high in this country, I would say, isn't it?
Well, it's such a sort of snappy sounding word, isn't it? Such a sharp, sort of hard sounding word.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much all of her suitors do manage to come out with some kind of little bit of vile misogyny when prodded a bit, don't they?
Yeah.
They're all quite happy to have had a really good time with her. But,
the great unknown that runs through the book is why she was running around with these fellas and having a note in her book and a weird code, and nobody really knows.
Yeah.
And then, it's kind of, that's the ongoing mystery, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the surveillance is going on with a few of them. There's a good sequence, just while we're on the subject of swear words and blue language, where Arthur Brown comes back to report on his surveillance, and he's reading out his report to Pete Burns. And at one point, he says he tried to follow him into a restaurant, and he was refused service. Basically, he was told the place was full and there was no tables. And he makes a point of saying, it's because I'm black, basically. And Pete Burns is like, is there anything we can nail them on? And he says, Brown tried to prove anything, Brown said. Stupid pricks, Burns said. It's like, yep, down to earth. And then when he finds out that 3 guys jumped Berkling, which sort of comes at the end of that, Burns just says, sons of bitches. He's a man of few words in this book.
Excellent contributions, though.
Yeah. But it turns out as well that one of these people that they visit is a woman, and Sadie Collins has been carrying on same-sex relationships as well. But out of all of the people they talk to, she's the only one who looks at the code in this book when they show her it, and she's like, well, it's pretty obvious, because that stands just, that's the place where I met her, and it's got those initials. That's presumably that place that she went to, that place, and they all feel like complete doofuses.
Yeah, she's the most helpful witness, really, because she's the only person that Sarah Fletcher's confided in that her husband was unfaithful and making her quite unhappy, and so therefore that suddenly reinforces the fact that so they start to straighten it out. That's where
all the motivation kind of suddenly becomes.
Yeah, they've suddenly got motive, haven't they? They always had opportunity, and they've suddenly got the motive.
Both the motive of the victim and her actions, and then the motive of the killer as well.
Yeah. Really. And they stop pursuing these names in the books after her, possibly, because
they don't really need to anymore.
And then Carella realises that all the bars that Fletcher took him to are all the bars that she'd met these people. So he's like, he's definitely guilty. Why would he be taken to those?
One of those bars that Carella gets taken to is the one where this girl comes onto him. So they're all different sorts of bars, aren't they? Some proper sleazy places, some violent places, one gay bar. But there's one in particular where this girl comes onto him, and she's like, if you want to get past me, you have to say the password. And he's like, oh, what's the password? And she says, kiss me. And he's like, I'm not saying that. She says, well, it's just the password. So he says it, and of course she plants a massive kiss on him. And suddenly Carella's like, When did I last kiss someone who wasn't my wife? It's like, that's so weird. Should I tell her? And it's just such an odd thing for him. But it's such a brilliant comeback how he gets back at her, really, by claiming that he's got a mouthful of sores. It's
Yeah, it does the trick, doesn't it?
yeah, it's quite good. Ooh, I will just say at this point, if anyone's wondering why the audio quality is probably different, well, certainly the ambient quality, it's because we have the back doors open today, because one, it's quite a nice day, and two, we're round at Stevo's house, so if you're hearing different sounds that you've never heard and wondering why the vibe's different, because we're in a different place.
We are.
Yeah. And if you're wondering why sometimes we go off mic, it's because we're leaning down to tickle the cat as well. So, just so you know. Anyway. But let's just summarise where we're up to about 3/4 away through this. Carella's surveilling Gerald Fletcher because he is instinctively believing that he's done it.
Yes.
Kling has been beaten up by 3 guys because he's been talking to this girl who was the original eyewitness. And ostensibly those are the 2 main threads.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of following. There's a bunch of stuff about how the technicians put bugs into the apartment when they finally discover that he's seeing another woman.
Yep.
They put bugs in her apartment. And there's a big section of transcript based on that as well, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, it's all
Certainly is,
typewriter text, yeah.
So
Well, Fletcher gets wise to the bugs, doesn't he? He goes all peculiar halfway through the transcript, and you're like,
Certainly does.
what was he doing at that point?
He starts making deliberate pronouncements to the...
praising Carella, doesn't he, all of
Yeah.
a sudden, and they can work out he's by the bookcase where the bugs were, but you wouldn't have thought they would have got, I don't know, they easily get all the court orders for planting all this, and I'm not sure they would have done, because they've no reason to believe that he's done it, really, other than a hunch.
yeah, the book suggests that it's up to Pete Burns to authorise it, but I'm sure it isn't.
No, you'd have to go before the judge, wouldn't you?
That's true. I'm sure he just didn't want to get too
Bogged
bogged down
down.
and all that.
Yeah,
He just wanted to get us to it.
Get a good story going.
It's fair enough.
Because they
And
also get to bug a car as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think he just wanted to get onto the interesting procedural bit about explaining the details of how the bugs work and changing the batteries and all that business.
It's interesting. It gives Carella the opportunity to go into disguise a couple of times.
Oh my god, that's totally crazy, that as well. He sounds like he's got the worst disguise ever.
This is when he's tailing him in the department store.
Yeah.
And
He's in the same lift with him
He is.
at one point. And he would have...
Steve Carella, master of disguise.
Yeah. When I was reading that scene, I just thought, this is ridiculous. Yeah.
I'll try and find the description of what he wears for the disguise. It's in chapter 12, I
He's
believe.
got a blonde wig and a moustache and glasses on or something. It all sounds a little bit silly.
Yeah, Fletcher knew exactly what he looked like, so he was wearing a false moustache stuck to his upper lip with spirit gum, a wig with longer hair than his own and of a different colour, a dirty blonde whereas his own was brown, and a pair of sunglasses.
It's Christmas. The sky's grey.
He does say the disguise he was certain would not have fooled Fletcher at close range, but he did not intend to get that close.
He ends up being in the same lift with him.
Yeah, he has to
How
try
much
and
closer can you get?
he has to try and work his way past, doesn't he? And what's even worse is then he follows him into the lingerie department and has to hang around there while he goes and buys
Loitering in the
a
lingerie
load of
department.
lacy underwear.
Yes. Anyway, yeah, that's a bit of a silly scene, I suppose.
That's quite fun, yeah. A little bit of relative levity.
Yeah, but it's funny because this book also contains a throwback to the last really snowy story, which was Fuzz. So Carella can reflect on the only time he liked snow was when there was enough of it around to put him out when he was on fire that time.
I've just remembered as well a totally unrelated matter, which I thought was quite interesting.
Go on.
In that this book pretty much absolutely ages Carella as well.
Yes, it does.
Almost definitively, which is very, very rare because you're almost left. You know, it could be anywhere between X age and
Yeah.
whatever age you think, but yeah, because he ends up chatting with one of the guys on the barman
of the saloon.
Yeah, when they start talking about having fought in the Second World War.
I was surprised about that, actually, when I came across it again.
So it pretty much ages Carella at like 43 47 years old.
Which is funny because I'm sure he seems younger than that later on, doesn't he?
So this book is 1972, and I think if you roughly go for the dating of these books, as you would assume, they take place in the year they're written.
So 27 years since the end of the Second World War, and if he was, say, 20 in 1945,
Yeah.
a very young man, he would be 47.
Ostensibly, he's Evan Hunter's age,
Yeah,
which is not surprising,
I
really.
suppose, yeah.
But yeah, it is. It's funny that that's the first, because there's been references to their military backgrounds before, but this seems like the first time you've really just gone World War II.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's culturally, by that point, people were talking about it in a bit more sort of those terms. The generation gap was such that to say World War II seems a bit more stark in this setting than it would have done 10 years previously and certainly 15 years before.
Well, in the later books, they start to get vague about which war, and you're led to believe, was it Vietnam?
Yeah, I think sometimes they
or
even
Korea.
specify it occasionally. I think by some of the very latest ones, a couple of people who've previously been in Vietnam and have now been in the Gulf War.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which is obviously an interesting way, but it kind of gives you a. Yeah, I just thought it was.
no, you're absolutely right. I'd forgotten about that.
And the good thing is he's having that chat with this barman who's quite a good character, because he's insistent that everyone knows what the words mean that he's using. He sort of says, relentless. You know what that word means, relentless? And it's frantic. That's the word, all right, frantic. Fortitude. You know what that weird word means? Fortitude. And it just keeps going on like that. That was a glorious war. You know what that word means? Glorious. I wonder if he's a character that McBain had met at
bumped
some...
into. Yeah, I thought I've got to get that guy. Yeah.
He's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not masses of real-world references in this book, but obviously World War II is a big one.
Well, yeah, there's minor
As they go.
occurrence.
I mentioned Spiro Agnew. There's a few references to music, because Nora Simonov sort of goes all daydreamy when she hears a band playing a version of something by the Beatles.
Oh yeah, she does, doesn't she?
And also there's references to a medley of songs that were all covered by Frank Sinatra as well. Ebb Tide, Strangers in the Night, and Where or When. I mean, those are all songs done by lots of people, but I think it's ostensibly it's a Sinatra thing. And the other things I spotted, he talks about Euripides, the Greek tragedian. I think that's how you say tragedian.
I'd probably go for tragedian, but I've no idea.
I'm going for tragedian. I'm not going to say it. I can't even repeat it, so there we go. So, an old Greek fella.
Yep.
And the other one is, he talks about Nora Simonov having studied art at Cooper Union in NYC, which is where he himself, Evan Hunter, studied art for a year before he went off to war.
Oh, right.
And then he came back and he was like, I want to be a writer now, not an artist. So
There we go.
So there's a very specific reference.
Fantastic.
And that's about it for real-world references. There's no particular stabs at any other authors or critics in this one.
No.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to have so much of an axe to grind this time. But,
It would give me great pleasure if we read the next book and I've forgotten that there's a whole chapter attacking Newgate calendar.
Yeah.
Every time I try and conjure up that fellow's name, I come up with something else that I think is his name, but it isn't. I was going to call him Highgate Cemetery before. Sure, would not have been right.
Yeah, well, he's about as cheery as Highgate Cemetery, isn't he?
Highgate Cemetery.
So there we go. Anyway, I mean, and this is where I think your somber thing comes in as we wind down to the end. Basically, Carella doesn't catch this guy so much as catch him at the moment of breakdown, where he, following an argument, confesses. We're well past spoilers now, really, and it ends so sort of. It's a proper long drawn out camera pan out fade type thing, isn't it? Of he resignedly goes and arrests him, knowing that what he thought to be true is true. And yes, somber's definitely the word for it.
Yeah, which I suppose if you're Newgate thingy, that counts as an anticlimax. But I think it's actually, rather than having some kind of generic sort of chase and dramatic capture or something, I think it really works in the book's favour.
Yeah, especially contrasted against the fact that it happens on Christmas Eve, literally just before the clock ticks over to Christmas Day.
Yeah.
And so, Carella is totally sort of resignedly like, oh, there we go then, basically.
Yeah, no, I thought the end was good.
Well, they cap it all off then. There's like a final paragraph as well, which is even more depressing.
It is, yeah.
It's just to put the seal on it. And I think what I find quite funny, I don't know about your edition, Morgan, but the editions that Stevo and I have, is like there is no end papers at all.
Exactly the same.
It's literally, there's nothing afterwards. No more adverts for books, not even a blank page like there normally is.
Yeah.
It's
just,
like,
just
that's
to
it.
make sure you end on a massive downer. So there's another spoiler. But,
Yeah. I think people will have got that idea. If they haven't read it already, we'll have ruined it for them. But if they have, they'll know anyway. I think we're really about the time we need to start summing this one up as an entry in the old canon. I'm going to use a proper, I was going to say typewriter then, I mean calculator, because it's nearby on top of the Georges Simenon book in Stevo's house. But I will pass Stevo a printout today of...
well, we couldn't wheel
no, we couldn't get
Kenneth round
Yeah,
or fit down the alleyway.
No, and I wasn't going to string the cables across the road either.
No, a
So
bit dangerous.
I need to bring Kenneth's output to you. In fact,
Look at that.
I can give you a copy each, in fact. So,
Oh,
there you go.
fantastic. Look at that.
So you.
Look at that, right.
So, do you want to assess again for the listening people where we're at trend-wise on the?
Well,
old
trend-wise, we're a bit erratic at the moment, a bit up and down, isn't it? It's what plods along. It's a bit razor-teethed up and down at the moment,
true.
but we're
Currently on a little upward
Up,
curve,
yeah,
which
we
is
are, yeah.
exciting.
hail the gan. It says there.
Hail the Gan. Yeah. Well, I can only
The-
fit so much
The
on
gan.
the
Dot,
on the
dot,
graph.
dot, dot. They can mean anything you want. Dot 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 dot.
Hail the Ganges is a river.
In the hands of a good author, a dot 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 can mean anything.
Yeah. Stevo, come on.
So,
then.
yeah,
I'm going
so-
to you first this time.
Well, yeah, possibly. I kind of summed it up to start with, didn't I, really? But, yeah, a sombre, serious book of a cat and mouse with some extreme language at times, I thought.
Did it offend your sensibility?
Well, no, it didn't at all, but it kind of shocks you when you read it and you think the early 70s. But anyway, yes, no, I thought it was a thoroughly enjoyable book, and I remembered thinking I rated it highly before I started reading it again, and it delivered. So in terms of police shields, I am going to say 90.
90.
Excellent.
Oh, we haven't heard that number for some time, I don't think.
Yeah, I think it's, a good one.
Okay, I'm just entering that into the remote Kenneth powered machine thing. So I'll go next, and I too had been looking forward to this one because I seem to recall it being a real solid entry into the canon, and I wasn't disappointed on rereading it. I like a number of elements that are pure 87th Precinct in terms of the future of the series, the behaviour of Kling. I like knowing what's to come, but obviously at the time, if you read this before anything else, it's like, well, there's Kling being a bit weird, but I like the way these things develop, and that's part of the joy of reading back when you've read later on as well. So that's quite good. I like the simplicity of this one in its own way. There's a few good moments. It's fairly light on characters. It's not full of cops, certainly not like Hail the Gang's all here.
Yeah.
There's a couple of references to Bob O'Brien and Carl Capek just in passing, but mainly Cotton Hawes isn't even mentioned once in this book, I don't think. And so he's
not.
not even in passing. There's not even a sequence about explaining which cops were on holiday or anything like that. Oh, I do also like the bit where Carella tries to convince Maya to give him Christmas Day because he's on duty on Christmas Day, and Maya's like, we celebrate Christmas too at home. You come round every year. What are you thinking? So I'm going to go in, perhaps not as high as Stevo, but I'm going to go a solid 85 police shields with this one. I do like it. And I hand over to Morgan Brown for the next stage of assessment.
Splendid. Yeah. Well, echoing your comments, really, I remembered it very fondly and wasn't disappointed on another reading. Although there are fewer characters than a lot of the novels, I think the characters that are in there are explored well. There's some really good psychology. I like the bleaker, cynical tone that it strikes, which I always enjoy in when you get that again later on in the series too. Yeah, I think it's an absolute corker, and I always really enjoy disagreeing with Highgate Cemetery, so I'm going to go somewhere between you. I'll go for 88 police shields,
88
I think.
police shields. Wowzers. Okay, let's see what that turns up. That turns up an overall score in police shields for 1972's Sadie When She Died of 88 police shields.
Yes.
And resident statistician Stephen Royston here is
Yeah, it
he's
might
drawing
possibly
circles on a
It
graph.
might just have pipped King's Ransom, maybe.
oh gosh, must be close, mustn't it?
Must be.
Well, I think.
So I think our top 5 then, because that would definitely.
Oh, this would be an interesting rundown. Go for it.
It's quite difficult to tell without.
I know it's a rubbish graph. I really need to improve the numbering on it.
Well, in no particular order, because they're all fairly close
They are
together,
pretty
to be
close.
honest. Cop Hater, King's Ransom, which always sticks out, doesn't it? I
Yeah.
think. The Heckler,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is a good one. Doll,
Yeah, we enjoyed that one.
and then probably Sadie When She Died now, to a top 5. And then we've maybe got to see them. Lady, I Did It, and maybe Fuzz knocking around there as well.
Excellent stuff.
all
Well,
good.
there we go. So, well, what will happen next is my question. And it was interesting you mentioned there the Heckler, because our next book that we'll be looking at,
What's the next one?
well, he's been in the Heckler,
Oh,
he's
well-
been in Fuzz.
Well,
It's Let's Hear It for the Deaf Man.
Oh, right.
He's back.
Excellent.
Join us at the next podcast for that, but also join us on the bonus podcast episode for some daft chatter about 1972 in general, but also a look at the book covers, editions, and stuff about casting the Fantasy 87th Precinct series. Bob O'Brien. And until next time, I'm going to say au revoir.
So long.
Very well.